All right, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. This is a work session on 2026 Capital Improvement Program Planning. Today's Friday, February 7, 2025. We are on the record from 2:10. Well, we're scheduled from 2:10 to 4:10.
Unmuted.
And it is now 2:20 p.m. We're getting started. We'll start with introductions. Mr. Salt.
Randy Solt.
Scott Myers. We're going to see how fast we can go because I got to jet out of here at 3.
Karen Braga.
Zach Johnson. Christopher Constant.
Felix Vera.
On the phone, Mr. Martinez, did you pop in?
Yes, Chair. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So, yes, we are scheduled to 4:10, but the Dunbar principle is in effect. That is a ceiling, not a target. And I've asked the administration to speed through what they can. We're going to have two presentations or kind of slideshows. Part one is Parks and Rec Department and Park Foundation on selection of park projects and how they work together. Mike Braniff, Taylor Keegan, Diane Rhodes, Michelle LeBeau. And then part two, project management engineering on selection of road projects, Chelsea Ward Waller and Mona Kohlhaas. And then we'll discuss next steps and what the Assembly can work towards on the 2026 CIP, CIB, and bonds. So welcome, everybody. And I want to remind everybody the work here is to learn from project sponsors and experts, as well as give the Assembly members an opportunity to ask questions and learn more about the legislation or topics in front of us. Not a place to debate. So I guess I should take that advice sometimes. Today, we will hear about our capital process. We'll share some details about project ideas. We want to try to demystify the process. We probably have to do this again sometime shortly after April because things happen. We'll have at least 4 new members. Educational process will be in order. The CIP is a 6-year plan for capital projects that put forward for bonds and state and federal and other funding, even tax levies. CIB is the capital improvement budget. This is the budget for the current year's projects. So we're working off the 2025 CIB at this time. But soon we'll be working to craft the 2026 CIB, and this will be the list we use to set the 2026 bonds and state capital requests and other levies. Before we begin, thank you to the administration and everybody that's here. We have quite a large crowd for this late in the week and the day. So I am going to hand this now over to Parks and to talk about the Parks capital requests.
Would you like us to introduce ourselves on the record first, Mr. Chair?
Absolutely. Say hello, Ms. Wynn Pearson.
Becky Wynn Pearson, Municipal Manager.
Ona Browse, Director of the Office of Management and Budget.
Great. And I'm Taylor Keegan. I'm the Superintendent of Anchorage Parks and Recreation. Thanks so much for having us here today. I will be presenting first, followed by Chelsea Ward Waller over at PM&E, Public Works. And I'll be focusing on Anchorage Parks and Recreation CIP and CIB development, as well as touching on the state of play, which is our inclusive play strategic plan. Next slide. Just to reiterate, 2 items today. The CIP stands for the Capital Improvement Program. It's a 6-year plan, as Chris said, Assemblymember Constant. And then the CIB is our capital improvement budget. And our state of play is evidence-based strategies for capital improvements surrounding play in Anchorage. Next slide, please. Okay, so I just want to take this opportunity to applaud my department. I think that I appreciate that intro. I think we get a lot done with a relatively little bond. Next slide, please. And how we've selected our CIP projects in the past, or the projects that are on the CIP, is a few different ways. One is we really tried to spread the love. I think I've heard Karen speak to this a few times at different work sessions, but the idea is that we spread out capital improvements across Anchorage to really engage voters and make sure that bond money is getting spread across the municipality. We really try to leverage outside funds. One example is with our partner Anchorage Park Foundation, who's been able to bring millions of dollars to the table over the last 2 decades for things like inclusive play, forest health, and youth development, our YEP program. Other ways we bring in funding is through legislative grants and AMATs. We also use community engagement, volunteers, cooperative use agreements, community advocates, really elevate projects. And then finally, health, safety, and welfare. What really needs to get done question we will ask ourselves is, has a bridge collapsed recently? Is an asset significantly past its useful life? So this really sets a precedent and priority. How it's going. Next slide. So today we're looking to formalize these focus areas and blend them with the PM&E scoring matrix model to facilitate more transparency and develop a record of need. Next slide, please. So we have in front of the assembly members today is a CIP scoring file guide. In 2025, we used this matrix in these categories to score projects. The matrix was completed by internal staff. For the 2026 CIP, we're excited to include PM&E as well as Anchorage Park Foundation. And you can use this guide as we walk through some of the case studies in the following slides. Next slide, please. Here's a summary of those categories for prioritization in the scoring matrix. As you can see here, there are a number of categories. They're numerous and weighted. We want to make sure that no one individual or category determines the development priorities for our department. And notably, I wanted to make sure we included clear language on this slide for the population served in park type, because that directly relates back to AR 2024-323S that was recently passed. Next slide. So we're going to go over 3 parks picked relatively randomly, aside from the fact that they're distributed through Anchorage and they range in size and need. So we're going to go over Forsyth Park, Goose Lake Park, and Didlika Park, or Didlika Park. If anyone can tell me the correct pronunciation, I welcome it. Okay, next slide, please. So Forsyth Park. Who's been to Forsyth Park? Great. It's a neighborhood use park in South Anchorage. In this park, there's a bridge and trail in need of rehabilitation. Wayfinding is needed. There's playground equipment that's in fair condition but can use improvements. And there's a tennis court that needs resurfacing. Specifically on the Community Council CIP for 2024, the community requested pickleball lines be added. It's a growing sport in Anchorage, and we're excited to look at areas where we can meet that need. I'd also like to mention that the pathway and that bridge in the photo is adjacent to Birch Road, where we clear snow in the winter months. And right now that bridge is in a condition where we can't put trackless equipment on it. So it really disrupts our operations and maintenance and is ultimately a health, safety, welfare issue. Next slide. So let's walk through it. We're just gonna score some things together. And these scores are ones that I put there, their suggestions. Note that the scoring matrix averages a bunch of people's scoring to create the final score. So consistency with adopted plan. There's no real recent existing plan that's relevant for this. So we have a 5 here. We know that there's some historic files of development. Public support, that Community Council CIP gives it a high score. Is the support of the project by administration and staff. Note administration, and this is outlined in that guide, is the mayor's office, and staff is Parks and Recreation. Yes. Is this project supported by the Community Council and elected officials? Elected officials, that's you all, the assembly members, as well as legislative representatives. Yes. Also ranked 14 by the Hillside Community Council. O&M impact, operations and maintenance. I did mention that that bridge is really critical to us being able to maintain that corridor. And it would also reduce the impact on our maintenance division to have to consistently go fix playground equipment that's aging. So 15. Funding, external funding or partnerships. None currently identified. Does this support existing infrastructure? Yes. What is the environmental impact? Maybe a little bit of tree clearing, but at this point, there's no real conversations about clearing the forest or developing wetlands. So here we're scoring high, that it's minimal. Excuse me, I switched those. We're talking about environmental impact. I noticed this in my run through. Okay, supports existing infrastructure. Construction would likely have small impacts on natural areas. Is this property MOA owned? Yes. Severity of need. I did mention that bridge. I'll just keep saying it's important. And then population served and park type. This is neighborhood use, relatively low population density. So we're scoring a little bit lower there, but still getting points because we're serving neighbors. So we're left with a score of 73. Next slide. Okay, we're at Goose Lake Park. Who's been to Goose Lake Park? Yeah, that's great. Who swam in Goose Lake? Yeah. Okay, so Goose Lake Park is a community use park in the New Med District of Anchorage. It hosts Mayor's Marathon, the Polar Bear Plunge, Haunted and Enchanted, and is a major trailhead for Chester Creek Trail. The Goose Lake facility was yellow tagged after the 2018 earthquake, so it is no longer open to the public and really needs some attention in partnership with the Facility Maintenance, Operations and Maintenance Division of the Muni. We also need some trail rehabilitation and wayfinding. The playground equipment is outdated and some accessibility concerns exist. You can see there's only a small part of the playground that has unitary surfacing, which means it's a single surface and would be easier to traverse if you had any mobility constraints. And then the parking lot and basketball court need to be resurfaced. This one was interesting because it was on multiple community council CIP surveys as a priority. So let's go to the next slide. We'll run through this consistency with adopted plan. Has a master plan, is older, needs an update. Has public support, not only from the community council, but also UAA and the surrounding neighbors. This is supported by administration, staff, community councils, and elected officials. High O&M impact. I'm gonna just say that facility is important to our operations, and it has been conveyed that the public would like access to it again. External funding or partnerships, informal partnerships are currently in development. Supports existing infrastructure, yes. Environmental impact, minimal. Property ownership, yes. Severity of need, high. Population served and park type. This is a community use designated park, and it also serves a diverse set of communities, especially in the summer. So score 81. All right, next slide. Then we're going to take us to a neighborhood use park in Northwest Anchorage in the Turning and Community Council. The playground equipment and servicing needs to be replaced. It is a 2024 Community Council CIP survey priority, or not a priority, but it was a request for development. And it has a small pavilion and a volunteer garden bed. Next slide, please. Here you can see we're landing with a lower score. So we have an older site plan on the CIP survey, but unranked, supported by all, small playground. Rehab would have a positive impact on O&M. No external funding currently identified. Supports existing infrastructure, is MOA owned. Severity of need is higher, but it's not in eminent it's not an eminent safety issue. And then the population served. So here we're looking at a neighborhood use park, and it really supports a single family zoned neighborhood in that area. So we're sort of scoring in the middle. It's a really nice walkable neighborhood. And so folks are going to use it from the surrounding community. So we landed with a 61. So next slide. In summary, this is an example of how these parks kind of provide a spread of priorities across Anchorage. And we have dozens of parks that we rank in this way, parks and trails that we rank in this way. So next slide, please. How does something get on the list? The number one thing we try to tell people when they ask how does something get on the list is go to your community council. We educate them on community councils if they've never heard of them. We talk about the CIP survey as the way to really engage your neighbors and figure out what the priority is for your community. After that, there's also challenge grant applications through our partners at the Anchorage Park Foundation. And they really help leverage local volunteer time or private match money to get park stuff done. And that really elevates a project. Letters from the community, is it a mayoral priority? Has it been brought forth by our maintenance staff? They're out in the field and they have a really good idea of what the condition of things are. Excuse me. Okay. Match or grant opportunities, a park improvement proposal, which is facilitated by our volunteer coordinator. And then there's other ways. This is not a closed system. We want it to be open and engaging. These are just some of the ways that things can keep jumping up on that list of, okay, this really is a priority. Needs, priorities, and condition change. And because of this, the CIP scoring matrix and its measurements are considered a working document. And so it grows and improves through iteration and insight. And our department really welcomes questions, and we really welcome feedback to make this process better. So if you see something you have questions about or you have feedback, please reach out to myself, Anchorage Park Foundation, or anyone in our departments or agencies. Okay, next slide. So I'm going to zip through the state of play here. Next slide, please. So the state of play was inspired by the 2006 Park Plan and the Inclusive Play Guide completed by the Anchorage Park Foundation, and our evolving perceptions of play, development, inclusion. So has a long title there. We call it the state of play. The goals of this plan: we aim to have all community use playgrounds be inclusive. Every community council has an inclusive playground, and all playgrounds have a final park score of 7 or below by 2030. Next slide. What the heck's a park score or a final park score? It's based on two things. One is the context of the site, which relates back to what is the park type? What is the population density in the area? Are there vulnerable populations proximate? As well as the site level. So we fill out a scorecard to look at, is there parking on site? Is the area fenced? What is the surfacing type? And those two have weighted factors that equal the final park score. Next slide, please. In 2018, this is what it looked like. A lot of playgrounds. That little box at the far right is the ones we are looking at prioritizing development for. Next slide. Here's some graphics from the spatial score. We got some nice maps, and I wanted to highlight that the people per playground in our population density analysis. There's a pretty fascinating spread about how many playgrounds are in each community council versus the population and what that equals for people per playground. Next slide. Here's that scorecard I talked about, and then some really nice photos of people in our parks. Okay, next slide. Getting at or below a 7. Here is a slide that demonstrates those parks that are above a 7, in bold, are the ones that are in design or on a CIP. So we're really working towards accomplishing the goals of that plan. Next slide. Community use is a priority. Again, here are our community use playgrounds, and the ones in bold are the ones that are in design or on the CIP. And then, next slide, please. Every community council, you can see here, the inclusive playgrounds, if that column is a 0, we're trying to make that say 1 or more. So you can see that the playgrounds on the 4th column are the ones in development, and we're marching toward our goals. I also want to give a shout out to Eagle River, who's developing Oldberg Playground, and they've got a bunch of projects in. I didn't get to update this slide before I put it out there, but I do want to celebrate the good work that they're doing as well. Okay, next slide. So completed projects since 2012, 35. And this is just playgrounds. On deck, we've got 9 projects, active projects. We've got 9 on deck that we will start once we retire those active projects or complete them. And then we've got 16 or more that we're looking after 2030, just based on our capacity to get the work done. And then next slide, another, can you tell I like graphics or tables? Okay, so I promise this is the last table, but I wanted to highlight that these are the playgrounds that we still need to get done. This is a pared down list, and the orange are the playgrounds that are either in design or on deck. And what you might see if we just use the state of play is all of the orange is concentrated on that right side. But if you look closely, you can see after the names, there's a little exclamation point, and that means it was a community council CIP priority. So what this graph is showing is that we're not only prioritizing the ones that we know are heavily factored into need of improvement based on the state of play, but also public involvement and community need, and listening to the voices of local community really drives our decision making. So that's why you see a lot just in that chunk in that middle, because we want to make sure that yeah, we're incorporating all of the things when it comes to capital improvements. Next slide. In summary, Parks is working to improve our CIP process. I want to give a big shout out to PM&E and working with Chelsea, who's been so awesome at bringing us to the table when she's talking to the Federation of Community Councils or providing a scoring matrix for us to work from, or just being a resource. I also want to highlight that Parks has a lot of mechanisms outside of the CIP that help support our department's decision-making on capital improvement development, such as the state of play. It's one example. And again, I want to drive home that these documents are not static. They grow and they change, and we really do welcome feedback. So if you guys want to do another session and learn more about the state of play or whatever it is, or just have questions, please reach out. We all make each other better, and this is not an exception. So with that, I will pass the mic on to.
I think there's just a couple questions on the first one. We
Okay.
can do this real quick before we pivot.
Yeah,
So
sure.
Be quick. So can we go back to your slide on the CIP ranking, like the points, not the case studies, but before that?
The pink box, that would have been slide 7.
Back before this, before like the scoring. Yeah, I think that's fine. It's perfect. Can you see anything that assembly members might think is a little out of balance or proportion? You asked for advice. So here's the thing. You put elected officials, us and community councils and every state legislator and everyone else into a category worth 5 points, and the mayor is 5 points. And it feels a little imbalanced. And I think that it actually points to a scenario we see a number of times, which is projects come forward, they don't have kind of the membership behind them. And then on the dais, when we come to the decision votes on the CIP or the bonds, we have a lot of hot topics because for some reason, values haven't been reflected in the process. And so it might be baked into the scoring that you're not hearing from the members. The members are being considered the community council and legislators. And so I think there's some maybe thought that could go into how those scores are levied, how projects get into the mix that relate to the members who actually are working with people who aren't just the community council. So just a thought on how there might be a mechanism that's built here to generate conflict by accident. So just thought. Any other questions? Ms. Braga.
I was going to ask, so Cheney Lake Park has a master plan, but it says it's 2003, and I'm told it was never adopted. How do you know if a master plan for a certain park has been adopted? And if a plan is that old, could you work off of that if, there was some mad money that came from the state legislature to help with a park?
So a plan is adopted through the Planning and Zoning Commission, formally and officially, and prior to that, it goes through the Parks and Rec Commission as well as the local community council. We have site plans that sometimes will just go to the Parks and Rec Commission, and we would consider that in our department something that is what we want to base capital improvements off of. Your second question was Cheney Lake, for example, and how.
Yeah, if it's like a 2003, is that too old, or would you want to update that plan before it was utilized, or do you do a refresher and put a new date on it occasionally, or how does that work?
Yeah, so master plan, typically the life of a master plan is 20 years. So for that, it's just reached its life of being relevant. So what we would likely do is just a small update to that master plan, especially if the conditions of the lake haven't changed greatly, to see what are the fresh ideas, and then use that master plan, especially because it's still within its 20-year threshold as we're definitely using that as the foundation of whatever comes next. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Last question on that then. Is there a system then by which the 20-year review happens so that it's done kind of effectively, like X number a year? Like what's the process by which that happens? I guess it's the adaptive piece, right? That you put that word in there, which is a really nice word, but I think some members might wonder, how do we make sure?
Yeah, so in the last few years, we've developed a public resource that on our website where you can go view all the master plans in the parks throughout Anchorage. And there's some parks that don't have a formal master plan or they just have a site plan. And we're working towards, I guess it's really determined by the priority per the CIP and all these other things that forms a master plan prioritization. I wish that we had the staff funding capacity to have a more strategic way to revisit things like 20 years. Okay, it's time to go. Another example of this is we have a 2006 park plan, which next year is at the end of its 20-year life. And I'm like thinking or working with my team to figure out how are we going to accomplish this amongst all the other priorities. And so, yeah.
Constrained environment. So what comes to mind, and I hate to suggest it because I think it's my least favorite thing, it's that OMB table of reports that we get a little link of, and there's like a million links within it, that probably there's some analysis that could happen within there to understand like how effective the 20-year cycle is, where we're meeting the mark. Are we doing some 3 times in 20 years because some activists are there and getting their needs met? Are we ignoring others because we're not hearing? It's not like an audit level thing. It's more like yeah, like what's going on here? Thanks. Okay, anyone else? I think we go to number 2 now. Right. We're on track. Welcome.
My little baggie here.
Chelsea Wardwaller, I'm the Capital Improvement Program Coordinator for Public Works in PME.
Melinda Nicole Haas, Director, Project Management and Engineering. Hello, everybody. Oh, so. It's the Capital Improvement Program CIP process. Slides look like. Thank you. Okay, so we have both of us here. That was a hard act to follow. I'm like, mic drop, absolutely, and I want her on my graphics team. Okay, so our presentation is built off of a previous presentation, so it might look a little familiar. We added a few extra things, but apologize that it's not super duper fresh. I'm just going to present some of the, I call myself the warm-up band. We really want to hear from Ms. Wardwaller, though, about some of the more details of the capital improvement project programming. So first off, next slide, please. Just to give you an overview, just real briefly, I'll touch on the project development process. We often get questions of, why does this take so long? So I'll just briefly walk you through some of the steps. And then the needs identification, all of the different entities that participate in us learning about what are the needs, and so that can be further reviewed and prioritized and developed, and where does it fit into our program. We'll also look at the evaluation process, very similar to what Ms. Keegan presented. And then also kind of give you an indication of what's coming up for 2025 in our construction world. I think that's always exciting. Next slide. So there again, I always love a side-by-side before and after. If we could just snap our fingers and get a project completed quickly. Some people say, gosh, why can't we get it done in the same year that a project is funded? But it is a development process. So if you could, next slide, please. So, we have many needs coming our way. Like Chelsea and I talk about 200 projects that are in the program. And because we have so much need and limited program funding, we don't want to put all of our funding upfront loaded into one project as it starts. We want many things to develop along the way so that we can reach all of our community and accommodate the needs. So with that, we use an incremental approach in funding. So whether it's kicking off a project with an RFP or in-house design and starting the design study or preliminary engineering phase. So that might fund part of the phase, and then moving on to after we know more about the project, then we're going into the 35, 65, 95% of the project. But that way also it helps us develop our engineers' estimates as well. So it feeds into our capital improvement program, our 6-year program. So that's the nice thing about some of these phases. Every time we're along the way, we're getting a little bit more information about what is the project scope and what is it going to cost. So that feeds into our CIP. But back to the idea of what does a project take so long? It's because with the limited program funding, it just stretches out the timeline. Next slide. So the need identification, very similar to what Ms. Keegan presented in, we have contributors from the community council surveys, our elected officials, but a lot of what informs our program are our maintenance needs. I think it's a little bit different than what Parks and Rec presented as far as their mission and their goals. We have adopted plans also that inform our projects. Let's see. One thing I was going to mention is one thing that we've added in the past year is a collaborative forum meeting with project managers, our maintenance personnel, and right-of-way folks. And we come to, and watershed, and we come together and we kind of just say, what do you know? What are some of the problems? Because some of those problems that street maintenance finds, for example, then where they can no longer effectively maintain a roadway due to road condition or storm condition, that can become part of our program project. See, next slide, please. Oh, I probably should go back. Let's go back once more. Thank you. What that graphic is showing is a road condition survey result. Every 3 years, we have a vendor that comes up and conducts a road condition profiling, and it provides a grading system of the road condition, whether it's rutting or it has rough surfaces, cracks, etc. So different conditions A through F, A being excellent, F being failing. And that gives you an ability to kind of give the big picture and a snapshot throughout our roadway network. And the survey is only conducted for paved roadways throughout the municipality. Next slide, please. This is a graph of the different conditions. We kind of lumped them into the 3 broad categories: A, B, C, D, and E, F. And it shows generally that the excellent range of A, B is in 40%, second category is in 40%, and the poor to fair failing condition is about 20%. Monitoring it over time, of course, the objective would be to see the poor and failing condition to be dropping in percentage over time as we accomplish more projects and maintain our roadway in a good serviceable condition. Next slide, please. So besides specific projects, we have program funding pots or funded programs. So a lot of those are identified as safety needs. We have safe routes to school, traffic calming, ADA compliance, but we also have watershed, pedestrian facilities, and pavement and drainage, various others, streetlights, Alaska railroads. But one thing that I just kind of wanted to point out again is a lot of these are maintenance oriented. Something that we're kind of considering with our capital program is to kind of making space for other projects. It's the idea of how do you get a transformational project to rank against some of these really failing infrastructure, and especially when we have limited funding. But I would say many of those more larger 2-mile corridor type projects don't fit as well into our bond funded projects. So we are coordinating with AMATs and DOT on developing those projects. So next, I would like to
Before you
turn it
move
over
on, I have a
to
quick
Ms.
question, Mr.
Ward
Solt.
Waller.
Before we pivot,
Okay.
Mr. Solt.
Real quick, when you do these projects, do you consider other needs such as sewer, water line repair, or upgrades that may be under the road? So we don't repair a road and then later come back, realize that we have to rip up the road. I know there's an example on, I think 100 that had something like this where you pave the road, but there's also a project to go put a culvert or a water line underneath the road that requires to tear it back up. Thanks.
Through the chair, thank you for the question, Member Solt. So we do have a very lengthy plan review distribution coordination process that we engage with AWW. Gives them an opportunity early on in our project phase, especially the design study report phase, to let us know if they are aware of aging infrastructure that they would like to replace for their water and sewer mains. For example, on 42nd Avenue, just north of Tudor, we are working on a project in the UMed district where we're looking at the roadway and managing the overall construction contract, and AWW has their water main project also being completed alongside with the project. We attempt to coordinate. Sometimes it comes down to the utility company may say there's more design life remaining, and they also have limited funding, so they're not ready to reinvest in it. Some of the other situation, like on 100th Avenue, also, knowing the perspective of Anchorage Water and Wastewater Utility, they have a mission to not necessarily extend unless there's a served public that's going to be the cost causer, cost payer kind of a model. So I'm a little bit familiar with that, how that works. But necessarily, I always want to ask the question, hey, we're going, it's never going to get any cheaper. Come along if you can. So we do coordinate quite closely with the utility companies.
Ms. Brawley.
Oh, thanks. I think, one of my questions, actually, I think both of my questions are probably later in the presentation, but thank you.
Go ahead.
Great. Thank you, Melinda. Next slide, please. This list is going to look very similar. This is our scoring criteria for our projects in Public Works. It's going to look very similar to the list you saw from Taylor. Again, like she mentioned, we've collaborated on this, and we are actively in process of reviewing this and making sure that it still makes sense. This criteria list has been in use as is for the last many years, and given that I'm new to the position, I tend to question things. And so I'm just asking the question, is this still serving us the way we want it to be? So we're working on that internally to figure out if all of these still fit, if the ranking that we've applied to them are all still relevant. How do we incorporate the feedback the Assembly's provided around density? But ultimately, we also want to streamline our scoring process because it is incredibly intensive, and we engage with those departments you see on the screen, PM&E, traffic, street maintenance, planning, AMATs. We want to use everybody's time efficiently. I think there are some new and interesting ways that we could be using like GIS analysis to help us answer some of these rather than people's, use some more objective rather than subjective thoughts on some of these. And maybe not everybody needs to score every criteria. That's something that we did when I was at AMATS with the MTP. We sort of had subject matter experts score the criteria that was related to their subject matter, such as planning helped us with the criteria around land use with the MTP. So thinking about ways that we can just be a little bit more effective. And part of the reason to do that as well is last year we had at least 5 scoring criteria meetings and we got through about 30 projects. And again, we have a list of over 200 and that doesn't entirely encompass all the proposed projects that even aren't on our CIP as it is. And I would prefer that all projects are scored fairly. And to me, that means that every project gets a score at the same time, because I think as we grow, we change and we have different perspectives, and a project that was scored something last year might get a different score this year, given her aging infrastructure or given changing dynamics in the community. So if there are ways that we can be a little bit more efficient, again, I just think it'll help. I think it'll help us better keep track of all the projects and move things forward that really are our priorities. All right, next slide. And as was mentioned, we want to work with our state and AMATS partners. There are a lot of different transportation projects and plans that come from a lot of different areas. It's quite a web, but we want to be consistent and reflective of the needs of the community. And when there's a robust public involvement process that results in an MTP project list, how are we incorporating that in our CIP list? Recognizing that some of the projects may be aspirational and not within the funding bounds that we currently have, but maybe some of them are. So I think I'm very thankful that I have my background from AMATS, and Aaron is and his team are so great to work with, that doing more to incorporate that into our CIP program. Next slide, please. So you've already seen this slide as well. This is our Public Works development timeline. It's similar to what you see in the CIP from OMB in terms of their schedule. I'm sure you're all pretty familiar with it. I did want to flag the highlight. You can see this year we had a strong goal under OMB through the administration to get the community council surveys out in January, move that timeline up. We had heard that feedback from this body as well. Unfortunately, you're probably aware that we didn't quite make that deadline, but we are working fast and furiously to get them out as soon as possible. And I hope imminently in the next literally week or two, those should be on the street for community councils to be scoring their projects earlier this year than they have in the past. And that will help us then have those scores back and priorities back from community councils when we go to do our internal scoring as well. So it'll just help everything move a little bit more.
Can I ask a quick question on that? So have you done any testing of the system this year?
Yes.
So that's a leading question maybe, but historically speaking, the system has been updated, upgraded, we're improving it. It never works right. And some councils, they submit their survey and then everything deletes. Some councils don't have access. Some councils, all of other community council projects get loaded up into their council as preloads, and then they work to delete them. They can't delete them. And so there's been a history of trouble with that system. And I'm hoping you all did some front end testing. I know you're just coming in. This is like round 1 for this team. But that's been the historic pinch point for that line right there, is some breakdown of the IT system. And that's notwithstanding the councils that are laissez-faire and don't pay attention and want more time and that stuff. It's like there has been a functional breakdown. So I hope you have had an opportunity to test it and are prepared for that spicy conversation that almost every year comes, like, how did this happen?
Thanks for that feedback. And I will just say that we are putting a concerted effort to actively engage with both the FCC and community councils directly. As soon as we went, Taylor and I presented to the FCC in November, just to give them sort of the background of what the CIP is. And then as soon as it's launched, I'm hoping before their February meeting, I'll be able to go and give them an update that it's launched and here's how to walk through it. And then also I am available to sit side by side with community councils and help them get their surveys completed. So regardless of how it's functioning, they have additional technical assistance.
In Harry Potter, Hermione Granger had a little tool called a time turner. I think you're gonna need one.
I luckily also have some personal experience as a community council
Yeah, got it. Thank you.
submitter, so I've
Good
been
enough.
on that side of it as well.
Yep, thank you.
Absolutely. Next slide, please. This slide is really just a repeat of the previous slide, helping folks that see things differently in different ways, just a different way to look at I think that sometimes the date on the community council survey is very confusing to community councils because even though it's 2025, it'll be the 2026 CIP survey for community councils. And that's because we're going to be using their priorities to build the 2026 CIB. So that's sort of why that's the way it is. And we can keep moving on. Next slide, please. I had gotten a request to cover Questica, and it is not it is the OMB world, but I just wanted to show a screenshot of what Questica looks like on our end when we open it. And so it's basically in the CIP, or when you open it and you see all those project reports of, what's the funding, what's the project description, that is all put into Questica, and the CIP is the result. So that's basically what Questica is when you hear us talking about, that's our budget software. Next slide, please. And as I said, that results in this beautiful document, which you all largely accepted with the changes on the right there. And you can always find, if you're ever curious, on muni.org/OMB. And I find that command or Control F function very helpful when looking through and wanting to find more information about projects, because they're all in there. It's great, particularly if you go to the next slide. As I'm entering in our CAPSIS projects based on what's in the CIP, as well as what was approved by you all in the administration in the legislative program, we are in the thick of it right now, working with the legislature to get in our requests. And this is also an area where I've been helping community councils. They put in their own requests. They work with their legislators directly, but sometimes legislators or legislative staff don't know exactly, what they're asking for. And we have the history of it being in the survey or have more familiarity with the project itself. An example this year is a community council wants to submit a project and their legislator has advised them that there's not going to be a lot of funding on the table. So how do we chunk this project? And that goes back to sort of the beginning from Melinda's slides, can we just budget the design process in for this request? So that's where we're providing additional support for community councils. Next slide, please. And then this is our fun community council survey program that we have. And I just wanted to flag it again for you all as a resource. If you're looking to see what your community council's priorities are, this was last year's. Every year, it's very small on the screen, but in that blue bar, there's 2 tabs. And if you just click that second tab, you can see a history of what they've submitted in the past as well. And this is another one of my bookmarks on my internet browser, and just I go here frequently. Even though I have it in a spreadsheet format, it's really helpful to just pull it up quickly. And hopefully we'll be using it quite a bit here in the near future as we get it launched. And I think I mentioned, yeah, that's what I wanted. Next slide, please. Again, another plug for another resource for you all. This has much of the similar information that you'll find in the CIP, but this we update on a quarterly basis. It's our Project Center reporting dashboard. It has all the projects. I will say, if you have trouble using this, because it's unfortunately not the most, it's one of those tools where we wanted it both to work internally and externally, and I'm afraid it's not super perfect for either, but it is a great tool. If you have any issues using it, just give me a call and I'm happy to walk you through it. You can select filters on the side. There's tabs along the bottom. There's just a lot going on, but go here for project information. Next slide, please. the big unveiling of our Plan 2025 construction projects. I don't think any of these will be a surprise to you all. You saw the CIB. Many of these are previous year projects that maybe just needed a little bit of extra time to make it to construction. And the ones with asterisks are pending our 2025 bond approval. But we're particularly excited about the West Anchorage snow disposal site. Construction started there this week, which has been a long time coming. As we've described, our project development process takes a while, but things do make it to construction. So that's our list and the various sort of buckets that we cover at Public Works. Next slide, please. Almost there. Just wanted to cover sort of historically our program funding at Public Works, PM&E. You can see we had some years with huge, those orange bars are the state grants. We had some really significant state grant funding years. We had some that had 0 state grant funding, I believe, to the entire municipality in those mid-teens. And then we're also very excited this year, we added the bar for federal grants. So we're crossing our fingers that that's moving forward smoothly. But you can see that if you look at the total funding in the table on the right, that supported a huge jump in our program. And we're looking to make sure that our everything can move forward as efficiently and effectively as it should, given that that will be a massive effort, given the workload that we already have. And the last slide is just our exit. Thank you.
Any questions? Anna?
Yeah, thanks. And I'll go back and watch the piece I missed in the meeting. One was back to the CIP criteria slide, sorry, the Public Works one. I just wondered, I see severity of need, and I see all these other pieces. Length of time on the list, I just wondered how that's addressed, because I don't see it called out here, because, you know, what we hear anecdotally is projects have been on the table for 20 years, or they get bumped off at some point. They never get back on unless one of us remembers to put it there, right? Or something like, excuse me, like that. So I just wonder, how is that really addressed? Because in theory, this is a rolling list, and we're in theory clearing items on the list so that new ones can be done. But what does that actually look like, and how does that factor in here?
Through the chair. Thanks for the question, Member Brawley. In fact, when I was watching the Parks and Rec presentation, I also kind of flagged, okay, very similar. The one category that is different for ours is the timeline. And what it does is it gives credit for something that's almost shovel ready. So if it's getting ready through those incremental phases of project development, it gets a higher ranking. Or if there's another a department's project, for example, an AWW project that we would like to have an opportunity to work together, there's an opportunity to also get another bump. So that was one idea I had. I don't know if there's others that Ms. Wardwaller may have.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, you know, support for projects comes and goes, and need for project comes and goes, depending on who's supporting what. And so that can also have an effect of projects coming and going, just by the nature of changes.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I think as you're looking at the criteria, I guess I would encourage, not because it's, you know, this was identified 20 years ago and therefore we should be doing it, but I do think some kind of caring for that, because I think then the perception is there, you know, what reason was something knocked off the list or things like that. So just kind of the perception piece. I have 2 other questions. I'll ask one and then I'll see if others have questions. Around the community council priorities in CAPSIS, I remember, because I've seen our legislators at our council say to the community council directly, please submit projects in CAPSIS or work with us. And I find that interesting because it seems to be outside of all of this process, right? But also not to say that we are the arbiter of all things, right? Because there's state roads, there's state facilities, there's other things. But I do worry, especially in the constrained funding environment, there's no orange anymore on that graph, really. And there's not going to be for the immediate future, I think. So at least not until conditions change. So I'm just wondering, mostly I just want to call attention to that because I feel like it's a gap or it's a missing piece. And I think many of us are still operating in the culture that you just go down and ask what you need for and then it gets funded, right? And we all know that's not true anymore, but that all of our systems are built to still really ask you and encourage you and have expectations to do that. And so, so again, I don't know what the solve is. It's not that we run everything through or we tell councils not to ask other people for money, but I just want to flag that and wonder if that's been part of the discussion. Again, not trying to tell councils what to do, but just the reality is if we don't even know that there's an ask, then how are we supposed to, advocate for it? So.
Through the chair, Member Brawley, I do want to say that part of my interest in moving the timeline up for the community council surveys, not that they can't look at what they submitted last year, but was so that they would have their CIP list in front of them when they get asked about CAPSIS, because that's a clear list of projects. And then they can identify this project hasn't made it anywhere, asking the city for it. Let's ask the state for it. So that's definitely part of my motivation for that one.
Through the chair to Member Brawley, I will also add that there are conversations specifically floating around about how CAPSIS is integrated into this program. As you said, the CAPSIS system is not ours, and the legislators, advocate that other people ask for access to submit those projects. One of the challenges I think that goes along with the old system versus, integrating how it works now is the column of funding identified within our capital budgets that are state requests and how that sort of trade-off works and whether or not they actually go into CAPSIS, et cetera. So it is part of the conversation as we're figuring out how this looks for the future.
I would offer there's also a feedback loop we should build with our legislative friends if CAPSIS requests get in, figuring out a way to get them to communicate back to us the projects that made it in. I know it's kind of on us in some ways to do that, but also it can be a two-way communication. And I'm not sure who, probably someone on the capital budget finance team, we can build some connection with to formalize that.
To the chair, that is the case. And one of the challenges I think is that, the legislative CAPSIS program has notes on the login page that say, if you would like a login, please contact your legislator and request one. And I don't know what the sort of process is for each individual office that allows access into CAPSIS, but I think exploring how they manage that on their side, it will be a good question.
Yeah, there comes a time when everything's locked in and they have it broken up by House district and by Senate district. And so when it gets to that point, it's pretty easy to generate a report that says, these are the things, and then we can do our homework to backfill things, but it's interesting. Mr. Johnson.
Yeah, thank you. So looking at the CIP funding, as I'm looking at that, is the amount that I see, like, for example, for 2024, is that all or mostly going towards 2025 projects? Is that how it works?
So I'm guessing you're asking about the bond funding?
Well, I'm looking at the last two slides really, right? So I see the CIP program funding, and it's, we have the bonds, but then we also have that nice jump from federal funding, so brings it up to a level that looks like we haven't seen in a while. Is that all being committed towards 2025 projects?
Through the chair, Member Johnson. So the federal grant that we received is the Safe Streets and Roads for All grant for Brokaw. And that is a $25 million grant for one project specifically. So that will be, once we initiate or once we sign that grant agreement, we've been awarded the grant, but there's all these steps to it. And so once we sign that grant agreement, we have 5 years to complete that project. So it was awarded in 2024, so we're giving it credit in 2024, but that construction will likely not happen for many years because it's a very large project.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Go ahead. Close.
Through the chair, I can also add a little more to that. A lot of the funding for the bond 2025 bond CIB will go towards construction for construction for the 2025 project starts. A large one was Quinnahock with a $7.1 million. We're adding fewer new design starts in 2025, but it will continue for the furthering the development of the other designs that are already underway. So not necessarily all spent in 2025, excuse me, but just to kind of give you a little glimpse of how it works.
Ms. Brawley.
Yeah, thanks. Another question. So this is, because I know this has been an ongoing conversation about the CIP, so I'm bringing up something that we probably talked about, I don't know, 6 months ago. The premise behind all of this is really that all of the community input gets funneled through the community councils, right? And so, and I know there's lots of valid reasons for that. I don't think we change the fact that that's the primary place that we ask people to go. But two scenarios come to mind. One is, let's say I live in an area where my council is not functional, it doesn't meet, and or the officers literally don't do this work. They don't initiate a survey, they don't ask people, they don't submit anything. And then there's different reasons why councils haven't submitted anything, I believe. But that's one scenario. So if I live in that area, how am I contributing to this process? The other one is there are, and I hesitate to bring up examples because I think each of them is a different case, but there's plenty of examples in the past of places where the community council itself, the people who are active and vote and show up at those meetings, it's a Venn diagram of interest where it's their interest and then there's all the folks who maybe want something to happen. And so if that council is actively opposing something, and again, there's plenty of valid reasons why, but let's say there is a situation where there is opposition to a project that others in that same geographic area really want. And the council is unwilling to support that. And they basically just say, take this off the list. In that scenario, how do we get other public input? And I ask that because I do believe that we should funnel most of this through the councils, but that is not the entirety of the community. And there are situations where there are actively conflicting interests or different interests. And so I just bring that up because I don't know how to build that into this, but I wonder if it's already been discussed or what mechanisms there might be to do that, to make sure that we're allowing multiple angles for people to participate in this process.
Through the chair, Member Brawley, there's multiple ways. You know, one is communicating with their assembly members. And I think we get a lot of emails and interest and communicate from, communication about needs from constituents. Two, they can call us directly or they can email. I often get contacted, could come to Kent, Lance, Ms. Ward Waller. But another thing that's happening, because I've mentioned that predominantly our projects are related to failing infrastructure, that's where we're catching these things. We're having these forums where we're coming together with Paul Van Landingham and Right Away and what's Charlie Eliason seeing, eyes on, dry windshield time. What are they saying? Bringing it back to the group. So mostly if a score is there, that might just give it another confirmation. That's really only what we're looking for. And some of those scores are just smaller scores because we're really looking for just a little extra, hey, what is it out there? We know what we see and we feel that this is important. So some of the projects, I'm not even sure, 74th, 75th and Nancy, a lot of rental properties. I don't know how often they're engaging in their community council in that particular area, but we already got their back. We said this is high priority. A project like that is already elevating itself. So, but I think there's multiple ways. Again, even departments, we come together often, weekly, talking to our municipal manager. We're all kind of in it together.
And I'll add that part of what Director Colas said is that the assembly is the point of contact for the public to have those discussions. The capital budget process and sort of the building of the capital budget is an annualized process that we use every single year. The same kind of conversations, the same planning goes forward. But you guys know that when there is something special that comes up, it comes straight to you. We need to talk about this now. This is a big issue. We're having challenges with conflicts of interest, et cetera, et cetera. So not only are there different ways for the public to engage outside of the community council, but there are different times, there are different processes, and the coverage of those layers provide more than just the one path through the capital process. And having all of those active at the same time lets us know, like, oh, if there's an emergency that we're talking about over here, but we don't have time, it's got to go into the capital planning conversation. So maintaining those layers and making sure that they're robust in access is important.
Yeah, and just very briefly, I think the more I think about it, the more I'm realizing it's not adding another conduit or another part of the process, because that's what I'm hearing you say, is that there's a lot of different ones. I think it's just because we've overemphasized, or maybe not overemphasized, we've emphasized this one a lot. And so it seems to be the default, and then it creates the what Member Constable was describing, that lack of trust, right? Like, we've put this in for 10 years and nothing happens, right? And there's reasons for that. Doesn't mean it was the perfect project to begin with, but anyway, all that to say, I think just really continuing to think about really how we set public expectation, because I think that's really one of the big problems we're trying to solve, is the disconnect between expectation and what actually comes out the other side. Thanks.
I had a quick follow-on to that. Maybe think of it slightly differently and have a question we asked a long while ago, to have a process built in to the survey that allows people not associated to community councils to make some form of nomination. Did that get baked in somehow? Have we worked that solution out? That way, people who aren't party to the in club have an avenue.
To the chair, I believe that was the conversation that we just had about how, if you
No,
were
there are many
outside of the
ways,
community
yeah.
council process, that you would do it that way. I think one of the considerations that we have given in rebuilding the process is the limitations associated with what is available for them to choose and select. But opening a public access avenue specifically for everyone and anyone to give input into our capital planning program, that's what this is. I think if there is a specific,
What this being.
our public process at large.
So, yeah, that's,
I-
you gave the process, but I was hoping we had some form of a tool, like an all capital project email alias that we can direct people to. I mean, it can come through us, and it does come through us, but we're like, if you average out anti-community council, but you have some constituents and the assembly says we like it, or members, we're less than 5 points, that's for sure. We're maybe 2 points or 1 point. But again, I think the request was a specific portal, and it doesn't have to be fancy, but a place we can direct people who say, those people don't represent me, right? Because they're real and they want to be heard in the process. So we did just have that talk, but I wanted to put the fine point. Did we generate a vehicle? I think an alias email could be enough. I mean, all assembly members is maybe not the right way.
I was gonna say, we can have that alias email forwarded to you if you like.
Right.
Yes, I
I mean,
understand.
we get
and
those,
yeah.
you know, in
Mhm.
fact, I'm
Yes.
gonna put it out on the record for folks here. We are gonna we're gonna invite the administration to pick one person to get on our email alias, not to reply, but to see what
Yeah.
we see, because we think there's a disconnection between what the administration is dealing with and what
Yeah,
we
can
are
hear.
seeing and
Yeah.
hearing. And so building some bridge there, so you have insight into these public records we're getting on a daily basis, the deluge. I don't want everybody that somebody said, send it to the all. I'm like, no, don't you dare do that. Let's ask them who they would like. Point being, I'm hoping there's a way we can
Yeah.
make it formal methodology, something simple.
Sounds simple.
Yeah.
Yep.
Nothing complex, no portal, and everyone signs in and you get a username. No. Okay, Mr. Salt, I think you had a question on Ms. Brock.
Yeah, I'll just add on that some other thoughts. So we have had examples or accusations of road service areas where the board members' property is well maintained and others are not. So, directing funds. So part of what we have to do to our citizens is, hey, your project is in the list. It doesn't rank. So unfortunately, you're not going to get it done. But it'd be nice to point them back to that ranking criteria where you may have gotten something wrong. So like Forsyth Park, you never mentioned that it is a thoroughfare for people the students walking to O'Malley Elementary, which would play into it. And you might miss that. Not to say you did, but it might help them review that criteria. we didn't cover how this feeds into like CDS, congressional directed spend. Is there a way that, how does this feed into that?
Through the chair, Member Stoll, it's a good question and something that I think each administration to a certain degree gets to take a position on, but the same thing with the CAPSIS and how are we directing CAPSIS responses. But we've been having conversations at this point about how do we want to be more orderly next year about having the three hang together such that we are actually more strategically looking at what our priorities are that are generated by the CIP, and then how we direct those into, both into municipal funding for the coming year and then also into requests to the state that we generate as an administration, and then also things we put into the CDS process. So I think more to come on that because they should logically hang together. We should be strategic about where we direct things. We shouldn't just be haphazardly putting them into different portals and hoping for the best. And so we absolutely are working on how this year, I think, we will be less strategic than we will be in coming years about trying to make sure that we are putting projects in the place that makes the most sense and are complementary to each other in their asks.
We have a baked in process called the legislative program that we hope is utilized effectively, and it has been growing in strategy. And we didn't go with two different programs to Juneau this year, so that's a good sign. Mr. Johnson, or Ms. Bronco, I'm sorry.
Thank you. I kind of reject the in-crowd thing. I feel like the Federation of Community Councils is going through changes, and I have heard very, very positive things at my community council meetings that we are opening new pathways. And I think, the only reason I ever got involved in a community council is to get a project that was dear to my heart on the list. And it took being several officers, and maybe it doesn't need to do that. But I think the conversation comes to the community council to help them build a process of a more thorough survey with the community. I shiver me timbers, do not like to go to next door. It scares me. But those community council surveys could go through there. You don't ever have to look at them, but you don't have to look at the comments that come with it. But Nextdoor could be a great place to at least encourage people that your community council is seeking projects. Please go to the meeting. But yeah, I think we're going to see good things, and I think it's the Federation of Community Councils can help engage with the greater neighborhoods in some way. So
Just add though that even the best functioning community councils only reach like 50 or 100 people out of East Anchorage is what, 45,000 people, 48,000. I don't know how many are in that community council. It's the biggest one. Fairview, it's 10,000 people. The biggest meeting, 100 people show up, right? And so as good a tool as it is, it has limits. And the idea is let's make better pathways. Like, I don't know that I would go with Nextdoor because I share your hesitancy, but what tools are available? Because it is the HOA of community councils. So.
Can I tell you one more thing? We have tried as a community council to have a community picnic years and years and years and years, and nobody shows up. It's crazy. But my next door neighbor just went door to door to door to door to door and put little slips up, and she got like 100 people at that picnic. And I'm like, so it's not, there are other avenues to get input. I agree, but
Yeah, that's it. So the end is just the people who show up, which leadership is all about who shows up, and they get heard, and they get heard really well. The question is, how do we expand that and hear from those that don't language access being another thing, like people who have issues that can't even speak the language in the room at a community council. It's like, yeah. So, okay, I'm going to say we're done. Are we done? Nodding heads, no last questions. So everybody, thank you for a very long day. And we'll be adjourned. Everyone have a good weekend. I hope it's slow and uneventful.